Okay, I'm going to explain our SG15 steam generator, and it's a generator instead of a boiler because we use a coil pipe and a separator tank. Many companies do not use a separator tank, or they have a tank boiler and you need an approval boiler certification to use their boiler. So we go higher pressure and we restrict the volume. That gives us 300-degree temperatures and a little bit more than that. Because steam gives up its heat at the point of decompression, we use an orifice at the end of the hose or close to the wagon or the container, whichever you're using, so that it's compressed until it gets to that point. And we've been trying to work in lower fuel consumption and higher heat. So we've spent a lot of time on that just so that it's a little more efficient. Okay, we start out with the hose connection. That you will hook a hose that comes from an ordinary hydrant pressure, preferably the low end at about 20 psi, the high end will be about 70 psi. Then we move over, it goes through the clear wave conditioner, which is actually a magnetic field that helps to prevent the solids from separating from the water until after it leaves the machine. So then we come around and we have a screen that prevents any contaminants that come through your water system. It sorts that out, so you can remove the plug to drain that. We have an on-off switch that starts the pump and the burner. And then we have a green light that tells us if the burner is getting power. And that starts from the flow switch. So if there's water flow through there, the green light should be on. This gauge shows the incoming water pressure. So it's just nice to know if there's any troubleshooting calls that we can ask what your incoming water pressure is. This gauge is the pressure gauge that reads the pressure of the water before the coil. And that's important because if that water pressure goes up higher than the steam pressure on this gauge, by very much, by more than 10 psi, then that is telling you that the coil is becoming plugged. Then we come across to the flow switch that I explained briefly, and that's a switch that measures flow and not pressure. Then we have a restrictor valve that limits the water that's going through the machine, comes around into the booster pump, because when water turns to steam, it expands so many times, and this pump helps to move the water through the machine. Check valve to prevent steam from coming back and damaging this pump. Then there's also the connection where the water pressure gauge tells you what the pressure is before the coil. The water comes through, down into the coil, and comes back up as steam after it's been heated through the coil. And also there's a high temperature high limit switch that if the water flow slows or stops, it shuts the burner off. Then we come to the water temperature gauge that tells you the steam temperature as it comes out of the machine, and the steam hose is connected directly behind this gauge. This gauge and this connection can be turned to either side that is the handiest for that. And there's a safety switch, pressure safety switch. And then we come around to the chimney end, the steam trap. There's a separator tank inside the coil that allows the water and the steam to separate. The steam trap drains the water off the bottom of that trap, and that will give you the higher temperature steam, because anytime steam goes through water, that cools that steam off to less than 212 degrees. So that's why we like to separate it and get a drier steam. It does take a certain amount of moisture to transfer the heat from the steam to the soil. So we try and get that within a tolerance.